Hey, how you doing out there, good people? It's your favorite fundraiser, none other than Kia Croom, the founder and host of the Black Fundraisers Podcast. Your favorite podcast. Yes, I'm going to say that. I'm going to say that. Your favorite podcast, lovingly produced by your favorite fundraiser, your BFF, the Black female fundraiser, committed to working with organizations that are run by and serving people of color and fighting systemic inequities. That's what we do at my firm, Kia Croom Fundraising and Philanthropy. If you're new to this podcast platform, let me welcome you. You're in good company. You're in for some great information, a couple of laughs, a little fun. If you're a day one and you've been rocking out with me over the last couple of years, you already know what time it is. So, if you have been watching the news and look, unless you've been living under a rock somewhere, you're probably, if you're a student loan debt holder like myself, okay, I'm up to my eyeballs. I ain't gonna lie. You're probably licking your wounds and still shaking your head at the ruling that came down from the SCOTUS last week, right? Which essentially declared the Biden student loan forgiveness or student loan relief program unconstitutional. I got a lot of side eye about this, right? And today's guest has got some side eyes too, but more than that, she is the founder of an organization that's working to promote awareness and to give voice to the voiceless, people like myself that are straddled with student loan debt. So without any further ado, y'all, we're going to get into it. I want to bring on Miss Bri Franklin, the president, CEO, and founder of the Prosperity Project, an organization. Well, I'm going to let her tell you about it, y'all. She'll tell it better than I would. Not to be mistaken for some of the other prosperity projects out there. See the name, see the logo, see the name, see the title here. Tell us a good, before we get into it, tell us a fun and little known fact about yourself. Well, first off, welcome, Bri. It's a delight to have you.
Thank you. So grateful that you reached out to ask me to be part of this. It was an instant, very easy yes, and I'm excited for our conversation. Let's see, to ice break a bit and tell you a fun thing about myself. This is a go to, but at 16, I was actually kicked off the set of Saturday Night Live. I like to tell this story because it makes us sound so much more of a big deal than we actually were. So, really, it just was, I was in New York for my birthday. My godmother slash aunt treated me and the whole family to a couple days in the city. And with her being in the media industry, one of her former coworkers was working at NBC, got us into the building, and she was just trying to give us a tour and show us a good time. And then we made it up all the way to the studio before getting quickly escorted out by a security guard. So yeah, it's just a random kind of, one of those things that happens that makes for a great story like this one. But to bring it back to why you asked me to be here, as you mentioned, yes, the Prosperity Project is my baby. We just turned 3 last month, and our mission is to close the generational wealth gap for Black women created by the now $2 trillion student debt, but what we call predatory lending crisis here in the US.
And I have the commas to prove it. If you need somebody with lived experience,
Yeah.
Because I still haven't figured out how to start paying those folks. And I'm gonna tell you the truth. My son is going to college next month. He'll be a freshman at Virginia State,
Mhm.
and I've told him, and I understand that he, in his infinite wisdom of being an 18-year-old doesn't understand the consequences of student loan debt or why this is so important. So I would just let him listen to my conversations with Navient and Sally Mae, and they would go something like this. We're calling with regard to, it's like, yeah, I'm aware why you're calling. You're not in my priority of people to pay right now.
Amen.
You're just not.
Amen.
I'm going to keep it a buck with you. So if I need to float this deferment or forbear, whatever we need to do, if I need to call y'all every 2 months, every 3 months, I got a tickler on my calendar and just been kicking the can down the road. So I was particularly, and there are people that are watching this that are laughing, but I'm being really, really honest. And I made a commitment to my son and to the many Navient people that I've spoken to. And I said, listen, you got me, but you ain't going to get him. You know what I'm saying? And the reason you're not going to get him is before I give you a copper red cent, I'm going to make sure that I can write a check to underwrite his education. So just know over the next 4 years, you're still not likely to get a copper red penny because my copper red coins are going to go to making sure that you're not calling his ass, every quarter of the year. Does that make sense to you? And they kind of laugh and chuckle, so whenever we're in the car, I'm like, Navient's calling, check this out. I'm like, dude, this isn't what you want to have to do. This feels like bondage. You know what I'm saying? It feels like bondage. I've been literally held hostage.
Yeah.
And as someone who has been working in public service, working in nonprofits for 23 years, making the modest salaries, doing the work that's moving communities. It's like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me, SCOTUS? So anyway, I digress. You feel my pain. I would like for you to tell me and the good people listening how you came about founding the Prosperity Project. And congratulations on being 3, by the way. I love a good Genesis story. So tell me about your origins.
Oh, yes, ma'am. So we got one for the ages. And I like to say it wasn't even something that, because people have usually asked it as, oh, what made you want to start it? Like it was just some happy-go-lucky, like I'm, picking daffodils. And then I'm like, why don't I start a nonprofit? Someone asked me a different way. A couple months ago. They were like, what provoked you into starting this? I'm like, that's the word. Because this was a response to being provoked. So my story goes like this. I graduated from Dartmouth in 2017. So, for context, I was not the first in my family to go to college. I was the first, though, to go Ivy, and a lot of people had this very false, very outdated understanding of what that path looked like and what opportunities were on the other side. So I just heard this very singular, uninformed narrative that if you go there, quite literally, everyone was telling me you'll be able to write your ticket. Companies will be banging down your door to hire you when you graduate, all this and that. And so June 2017 rolls around, and I was like, where are these magnificent offers that everyone was telling me about? And then about a year later is when I actually realized how much debt I'd accrued. I got some soft hints leading up to that, every single term, there was always some beef with the financial aid office and some reason why I couldn't check in for classes because we had to get more debt dispersed to cover the balance. So it was just the same old song and dance, but I didn't actually understand how much I was in until after I graduated. So the first time I got familiar with the number was fall 2018. That's when I was like, okay, this is a lot of money, but I don't know how I'm going to pay it all off. And I was still in forbearance on the private loans. So there was just no sense of urgency, no real pressure. Fast forward about another 6-7 months after that, though, that time had been exhausted. And then it was time to face the music. And again, I was just in such a fickle boat financially. Like I did not have proper financial guidance growing up taught to me in home or in the school. So I was just making the best decisions with what little knowledge I had, which were not very good decisions. I had racked up other kinds of debt, credit cards, everything you can think of. And I was also earning very little because I had started my first business, the English Major Takes Tech, which I like to say on good days brought in profits that were inconsistent and on bad days, profits that were non existent. So my earnings were barely enough to just cover the basic necessities. I mean, phone bill, um, credit card minimum, which is 35 a month, and then food, right? So I'll forget about an $800 student debt private loan balance. That didn't even factor in federal because, as we've seen, that's been, you know, hushed in the background for the longest. But it all finally caught up to me in about July, August of 2019 because I just resigned. I was like, you know what? This isn't fair to me. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I got myself into. Y'all aren't going to see this money. And I don't have any way to pay you. Even if I wanted to, I wouldn't pay you. But they responded to that. I was just so done with them. Like I had written all kinds of just snarly, angry messages, but it caught up to me when my credit tanked 150 points overnight because I had gone that late on my payments. And the worst part was it wasn't just me that was affected, it was my dad who was a co-signer on most of those private loans. And so, I mean, just to hear you talk about how you're in the mindset of trying to keep your son out of the trenches and like be proactive and advocate before it gets to that, I'm just so glad that, there are families that have learned that lesson because I think there's so much to be gleaned from our experience and how we did things. So yeah, it just put me in such a tight and difficult position. And I was resentful. I was very bitter. I was very just mad at a lot of people and at the world. But then I remember thinking to myself, this anger is not going to do anything. Like I can have the debt and be angry. I can have the debt and not be angry. And, just so going into COVID, when everything shut down, like the two jobs I had managed to get to just start turning things around, those, were acts like everything else. So it was like a couple months of just sitting with myself and with the Lord and being like, God, I know you did not put me on this earth to just pay these people back and die. Like I know I have way more to offer than that. And then, yeah, just it was very organic. I've been reading a lot of entrepreneurship and self help books leading up to that point, and I just was like, it's time to take a risk. And I ran a survey. I didn't even set out to start a nonprofit. I was just trying to check in with the community. And as I got feedback come in, I saw that Black women, unsurprisingly, were in dire straits, but it made so much more of a connection because I'm like, these are people I know, family, friends, people I once worked with. So it's like to see them going through it versus just reading about it written up in the New York Times or some published study really made it hit home and just was this light bulb moment. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I think I may have just started a whole organization. And so it's just been a learn as I go, build the plane as we fly it adventure ever since.
So let's unpack something, Bri. You mentioned a couple of things that really struck me. The fact that being straddled with this debt has, it sounds like it affected you in some deeply personal ways. It has some professional implications. I mean, the American dream, we're taught to build credit and, in this capitalistic society, that we can reap the benefits of that. People talk about bootstrapping and, you've launched businesses. People talk about, oh, well, just bootstrap it, just do this, just do that from these like patriarchal white supremacist lens. It doesn't come that way when you come from a community like I come from.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what's really at the root of this is what I see as generational poverty, right?
Yes.
My inheritance as a Black woman in this country was generational poverty. I was born into extreme poverty, grew up in the 80s. Um, I mean, and I know that this is resonating with some folks, but poverty was my inheritance. You mentioned the fact that you didn't have education or guidance on how to manage your finances as a college student. Neither did I. I was on the campus of the Clark Atlanta University, my beloved alma mater. I do call it the Clark Atlanta because it's the one and only, where our motto is find a way or make one, right?
Mhm.
When I walked on the campus of the Clark Atlanta University, one of the first people that I encountered was a credit card vendor. You talk about predatory, right? I can't even remember the company that I got my first credit card from. A person from modest means, having access to capital like that, and what are we buying as college students? Essentials, food. I lived at KFC and at the Pascal Center, on those days when I didn't make it to, eat in the dining hall, what have you. So, as a person that wasn't educated, right, and encouraged to be mindful of, things like credit card debt, student loan debt, I was taught to do whatever it took to
Mhm.
get that education, and that education was going to yield a substantial return on investment, and that these loans, this debt, wasn't even going to be an issue.
Mhm.
Here's the reality. According to the Education Data Initiative, and this is data from May of 2023, over 50% of Black student borrowers have a net worth that is less than what they owe in student loan debt, right? And just to give a little bit more context, this same entity is reporting that 40% of Black graduate students have student loan debt compared to 22% of white college graduates. So when we talk about generational poverty, when we talk about the racial wealth gap, there's some real serious implications from the gate for Black and brown people. There are hurdles and barriers that befall us that, aren't, like, we're not set up to succeed in this.
Yes.
Should someone like you or I, who is incredibly ambitious, has a servant leader heart and mind, have a reality of being straddled with student loan debt, right? Without any recourse. Yeah, it just baffles my mind. And here we were holding out. I was feeling particularly encouraged by the student loan debt relief program, and we get what we got last week.
Yeah. You said a mouthful, and I feel like it's just, I'm hearing you speak, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I had an epiphany about this, and yes, that part. And it's just, it's so rare that I meet people who are so deeply aligned with how I view it, because I realize that I'm shattering the mold, and I'm proud to be that disruptor, because I'm like, we're not doing our community and our young people any favors, by holding on to these outdated beliefs. And exactly what you said, how families will just put so much pressure on, us as students to just go take out debt, and consequence be damned, because, well, get that education. And even if you have to take out extra loans, like, just this whole
Just
it
get
will pay
through.
off thing. I'm like, it's so irresponsible. Like, that's just the hard truth. I'm not here to point fingers at people, on the parenting side. I'm not a parent, so I fully understand that for people this is sensitive. But I mean, I don't think that you necessarily have to be to just appreciate what does and doesn't make good financial sense. Like, let's divorce ourselves from the status and from the type of debt. Let's just say, would you ever encourage an 18-year-old to take out $150,000 to go get a Ferrari, or, to put money down for a house that they probably have no business buying that young at that age? It's like something about the fact that it's tied to education just makes people abandon all logic, and they just are, because again, it's thinking back to a time when we were barred from being successful, and when we had so many barriers trying to limit us through redlining, through discriminatory initiatives, policies, legislation. So I get that once upon a time, an education in the traditional sense was the only way for upward mobility. But I'm like, it's falling apart. This bubble is starting to burst before our eyes, and we've got to stay ahead of that curve. And we've got to just put focus back on what matters, which is young people's ability to self sustain and become financially stable. And a degree may lead to that. It may increase your earnings if you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer. I certainly want my dentist to have a college degree, but I'm like, that does not pan out for every career path. And I think also too, we just have to change our perspective around what it means to take on that debt, because people have made actual enemies out of me by, in my presence, referring to student debt as good debt. If you're watching this and if you meet me, do not ever use that term, because that's so personally, because how I see it is people have good experiences with that. Some people have bad experiences with that.
Absolutely.
And I'm like, you cannot tell somebody how that should make them feel, because yes, you may have done it and it all played out the way it was supposed to go. Your family wasn't made of money, so you took out, 15, $20,000. You worked your way through, paid them off in 5 years, and then washed your hands and lived a merry life. For somebody who is in the trenches and they don't have two nickels to rub together, and they're just at the mercy of these vicious predatory institutions who are exploiting their youth and their ignorance against them, it's a totally different ball game. It's not something that you just 1-2 step and side shuffle your way out of. It's, as I like to use the analogy of being pulled out of the audience and then competing on Dancing with the Stars. You've never been taught the routine, but you have to nail every step and score and place, and you have to do it to perfection. I'm like, this is not child's play. Taking out debt has real consequences, and just the irresponsibility that's working against us. Like, we have to do better at equipping our young people to look out for that and to set them up for success. And that does mean divorcing yourself from very traditional, outdated ways of thinking about being educated. So, I mean, I could obviously say an even longer mouthful on that, but that's
Yeah.
my biggest points is we've got to just throw away the terms good debt, bad debt, and realize that it impacts people in different ways, and they have a right to feel that anger and hurt if it was a bad experience for them.
No, absolutely. And that's why from the time I had the financial ability, right? Because I'm very transparent about the fact that I've had the $40,000 a year jobs as a fundraiser, early in my career, the $60,000 a year job where I was single parenting, taking care of my son and taking care of my mother who lives with, behavioral health needs on a $60,000 salary. And I purposed in my heart and in my budget to set aside a modest $150,000. I mean, $150. I wish it was $150,000. $150 a pay period was the most that I could afford, but set aside in good faith to put towards my son's college education. And today I sit in front of you with pride because I can write a check for his first year of tuition. In fact, I'll be writing that check in a couple of weeks, and that is huge for a person like me who, again, my inheritance was generational poverty
Mhm.
from my great great grandmother who was enslaved woman who was freed, at the age of 10. And what did my family do at that time, right? When the Emancipation Proclamation, she was 10. They sharecropped and continued this perpetual cyclical generational poverty, right? Which was bequeathed to me. So for me, as a Black woman who single-handedly raised a Black son to be able to write a check for his tuition clean and clear, I'm proud of that, right? And what I want people to know is this is real stuff, and people's lives are in the valence here. And many of us are licking our wounds from several of the devastating blows, aka rulings, that were handed down by the SCOTUS last week. So research reports that, or news reports that, it was a 6-3 vote in which the SCOTUS declared that the Biden administration had overstepped its authority when it announced canceling up to $400 billion in student loan debt. You and I have already talked about who's impacted by this, right? Black and brown people, Black women, brown women, you name it, because one thing about Black women, we gonna get our education. Yes. Because we know that as Black women, you have to be good as gold just to be silver. You got to be good as gold just to be silver. We're very deliberate about making sure that we're qualified, that we're educated, that we're doing all of the things that we can do to make sure that, you know, we're credible and qualified, right? So let's be clear. Yes, we're licking our wounds, and our beloved justices who voted against the student loan relief program included Chief Justice John Roberts. No surprise there. Mm-hmm. Samuel Alito. No surprise there. Clarence Thomas. No surprise there. No surprise there. Neil Gorsuch. No surprise there. Nothing new here to report, folks. Brett Kavanaugh. No surprise there. And Amy Coney Barrett. I'm not even going to give her, whatever, right? If you had I don't have it for her. I didn't have it for her when she was named. I don't have it for her. I'm not even going to say her name again. It's not even worth my, breathe, my breath, right? Don't have it for you, sis. If you could talk to these 6 individuals, what would you say? I can't say what I would say. Can you say what you would say?
Oh my goodness. I've given so much thought to this.
If you could talk to the collective, what would you say to them?
Oh, depending on if we were in a boxing ring or just over a table, you know what I mean? There is so much to be said. And I mean, none of it is family friendly. So, I mean, I'll do my best.
So we ain't gonna get into what you would say. I think I know what you would say. It'd probably be like a lot like what I'd say.
It would be, but in all seriousness, I mean, especially for Clarence Ruckus. So if people watching this are fans of the Boondocks, y'all get this reference. I mean, it just hurts so much more when it comes from your own. And I mean, like you said, based on the track record, we knew better than to expect him to defy the odds of anything and suddenly actually start making sense and acting in our best interest. But it still doesn't erase just the pain of like, wow, like this is the policy equivalent of you seeing people on the floor with bones broken, who are hurting, who are unsafe, and kicking and spitting at them when they're down. Like this is a chance to be a human and put people before profits for just once. And you completely obliterated that opportunity. And you stand so convicted that this is the right way because, we got to teach these irresponsible people a lesson that no one's coming to bail you out. And they just got it all the way effed up. Like they're not thinking about it in terms of how it actually happened. They look at it as people trying to play the victim. And I'm like, this is not people who were just out in Vegas gambling and drinking and making poor decisions and being reckless. Like they were trying to pursue an opportunity that people have been drilling into us since before we could read and write, that's the only way to make something of yourself is to go to college, do it the right way, quote unquote, and then use that degree to get a job and, climb the career ladder and so forth. And they're just not, it's like either they just don't realize it. So it's either ignorance or just indifference. I mean, they're both pretty bad, but they just are missing the fact that it's a system that has been distorted from its original virtuous structure. When student debt was first, or loans were first introduced as a function of the GI Bill following the war in the 40s and 50s, there were so many more guardrails and limitations. The most you could borrow in a single calendar year or school year cycle was $1,000. And sure, adjusted for inflation, that's somewhere around 15, maybe 20,000 in today's money. But even still, that's a far cry from the 180, 295, upwards of $1 million student debt balances that people are real life carrying today. And it's not because there's been an increase in the value of that degree. If there was, you couldn't argue, then that's just simple inflation with the times. And well, if you want to make more, you got to pay more. It's actually going down. Like, it's like the X is reversing. The cost of the degree has no positive correlation to the students' earnings once they graduate. And so many schools just leave their students out to dry. I mean, I could speak to that too. My extreme disappointment in Dartmouth, if you weren't on track to become an analyst or a hedge fund manager or an investment banker or an economist or whatever, they were not checking for you. Like, they did not have a fraction of the career transitional support and the pipelines and any of the infrastructure for anybody else. And I was definitely, as an English major, in that anybody else crowd. And so I just want to just stress to these folks, like, we need people to act with empathy. Like, just put yourself in someone else's shoes. Like, I know each of y'all, again, this is me talking to them. Like, I know at some point each of y'all has been deceived. I know someone has, tried to get over on you or taken advantage of a loophole that you weren't aware of, or just, had bad intentions. Like, hopefully you have a soul and you can remember that and be like, wow, I never thought about it like that. But there's a chance that maybe they don't even have that. And they just really are out here, acting as robots and detached from reality. Um,
Yes.
so yeah, it's just like, use your heart. You have it for a reason, and you are, for reasons only the Almighty can understand, put in this position, and like, you were entrusted with this power. Like, just use it for good just once.
Just once. Was that too much to ask? SCOTUS.
Mm-hmm. And
You know,
around the corner from them, I just realized today, I've been in DC since January, and I knew, of course, like the back of my hand, the Capitol building, because this region is called Capitol Hill. And I saw this structure. I'm like, I wonder what that is. And I look on Google Maps, Supreme Court of the United States. I'm like, oh, every time I take this route, my face will scrunch up just a little bit voluntarily. Yeah, we're neighbors.
oh, it's I don't really have the words. I'm just gonna say it's a lot. But no, I would echo some of what you're saying. I don't know that uh, it wouldn't just be falling on deaf ears, but I'd have some things to say.
Yeah.
Uh, what is next for the Prosperity Project, given what has taken place?
So on our end, I mean, if anything, these negative these things that tend to be like net negative in most cases actually tend to somehow still be a net positive for us, because our whole premise is picking up the slack that this administration continues to leave. I mean, we're basically rehabilitation and construction of sorts, right? And helping build up Black women's potential and rescuing them from the metaphorical fire of student loans. So, I mean, really, this hasn't had any negative bearing on us. If anything, it's been an empath to pick up momentum, because a lot of people were naively holding out hope. They were just, because they were so desperate, which I fully understand. This is not blaming them in any way. It's reasonable to trust the people that were appointed to lead you and that you yourself may have voted for to lead you. So it's just gravely disheartening when they let you down. And so now that people have come to accept that it's not going to happen like they thought, there's a lot more demand for the work we do, both through our flagship program, 35 to Free, which, for those unfamiliar with us, that's our bread and butter, how we got our start. That's our program that directly helps render aid in the form of retroactive scholarships to reduce the financial burden of our Prosperette student debt, and also educates them on finance and career development. But also, we've transitioned over the last couple months into policy and advocacy, and building awareness. So we have another programming arm called Prosperity Through Clarity, and it's where companies will hire us to come in and lead workshops and discussions about these very issues and just bring more awareness and education. And because of how it's starting to affect people's workforces, there's an appetite for that type of work. So we've been fortunate. Earlier this year, we did one with FINRA. Way back when, before we even had a name for it, we did something similar for BuzzFeed. We're in talks to do a couple others with some major banks later this year. And then certainly for SLAM, which is Student Loan Awareness Month in October, we're going extra hard. So just getting our ducks in a row now during this quiet before the storm in Q4 to get that rolled out. So, I mean, the work, of course, never stops, but especially now we really have our marching orders cut out for us, because it just comes back to, well, since y'all won't do it, somebody's got to do it. So let's go.
Let's go. Oh, I just got to exhale.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot to unpack. On a more lighter note, we have arrived at the portion of the show that I call For the Culture, where we talk about Black culture. We talk a little of this, we talk a little of that, a little rap, hip hop. Sometimes we talk about food, all the things that I love about us. One of which is rap and hip hop. I'm an unabashed rap and hip hop head. It's been a soundtrack, some of it for my life, and it has been an art form that has had considerable anti-Blackness perpetrated against it since its inception. Ironically, well, I don't think it's ironic. Hip hop and rap being birthed in poverty, right? In concentrated poverty. And the fact that so much anti-Blackness is perpetrated on this art form, it's only right that we pay an ode to hip hop through this platform, especially given the fact that it's the 50th anniversary of hip hop. We're repping, right? With all the pressures and stresses of these challenging times, what's in your playlist? What's giving you life these days?
Oh my gosh. Well, it was just like perfect timing, I think. Like the Lord delivered this new release at this point in time very intentionally. I'm a blurred Black nerd, so I live for the Spider-Verse franchise, and I love how they the whole Peter Parker story, and they've added Miles Morales. So of course I was front and center. I've seen the movie now 3 times, and it just came out a month ago. But that soundtrack goes so hard, and it's hip hop, of course, because Metro Boomin. Shout out to Atlanta.
Oh, Metro Boomin did the soundtrack?
Yeah, they commissioned, and they even gave him a cameo.
Oh, wow. I might get into that. I like Metro Boomin. What he does.
His thing, but it's mellow. And I think I've been taking a lot of walks lately and just trying to get my steps in and stay, active and clear my head, because I think just breaking free of these 4 walls is so needed, and we all need to just be mindful of our headspace, and outside is a remedy. And it's the perfect walk around the city, just taking it all in soundtrack. So the tracks from the movie for sure, but also SZA's new cuts. I love her song Snooze.
Okay.
It's just so mellow, and it's just, a breath of fresh air, just very calming energy. And I think as riled up as you've seen in our conversation today, as I can get about these topics, I have to remind myself not to always feed that beast, because that's what leads to chronic stress and burnout. When I may feel like using DMX to be my soundtrack through a situation, I'm like, this is going to make me just go and curb stomp somebody just for the hell of it. Let me not. So I try to lean into these more low-key vibes, and that just is really good for preserving my mental, and of course still keeping connected to the culture.
When you said DMX, the first song that popped in my head was Bring It. We right here.
You know,
Where,
whatever.
yeah. Oh, I miss him. I miss him so much. Oh my gosh.
Talk about a legend.
Whew. Well, no, that's good. I'm gonna have to get. So this isn't like the trap music retro boom, and this is some a different vibe.
He tried something totally new, and it did. I had to grow into it because I first heard it, and I think we're all guilty of this in some ways, like especially if you feel really strongly about something that came before it. Like the
Hmm.
first Spider Verse, I was equally as obsessed because where I was in life, it felt like the plot mirrored things that I was up against. So I really was like, oh my gosh, this is almost, like my lived experience in some ways. Obviously, like not the superhero ways, but
Okay.
just and so I was going into this viewing and this listening of the new music with that old template in my head and just
Okay.
immediately comparing, kind of like how you shouldn't do if you're dating, right? Like you get out of a relationship and then you're tempted to just compare the next person, down to the T and the way they tie their shoes to how that other person measured up. It's like gives people and things a chance to stand on their own two legs and just be it and see how you like that objectively. So once I was able to appreciate that, he's taken it in a different direction, it's a new vibe, I'm like, it fits, let me just embrace it.
No, I'm with it. I have to check it out. Well, I want to thank you for joining me on the Black Fundraisers Podcast. I want to thank you for the work that you're doing to help promulgate economic justice for Black women. What you're doing to advocate for Black women, for historically minoritized racial groups that are really bearing the brunt of the impact of this student loan debt crises. And like you pointed out, these predatory practices. Just thank you, sis, for the work that you're doing.
Mhm.
We will keep an eye out and look for ways that we can support or amplify your voice or the voices of Black women who sit in the shoes that I'm in and that you shared that you're in, that are trying to figure this out day by day, right? Any parting words before we blow out of here today?
Well, to you, I again just thank you so much for handpicking me to be part of this conversation and moving it along so urgently, because sometimes when I get approached for podcasts, they're like, okay, well, this won't air for like 6 months, so you'll have time. So just the fact that there was immediacy around this opportunity, I really value and appreciate. But yeah, just to everyone who tunes into this and comes across it, whether it be right away or down the line, certainly we need all the support that we can get, because I mean, we're biting off a lot, and I stand by that. People tell me all the time, this is such an expensive program to maintain. And I'm like, you're damn right it's expensive. Like student debt, it takes a lot
It's
of money to
expensive,
fix,
right?
and we need those donor checks. Like we're trying to do more, especially here in the DMV area, since we have our hybrid cohort happening out of here this year. So trying to nurture those relationships. We will be doing some programming people can come to physically. So as I touched on earlier, Slam October, that's our big month, Student Loan Awareness Month. So we'll be doing some hopefully a fundraiser then that draws a crowd and just building more awareness, because next year we are like really taking it up several notches, expanding a program into New York and potentially a few other cities. And we just want to be that go-to resource and just keep building community wherever we go. So and then certainly to check us out, the website is the prosperity with an A, so that's prosperity project.org/donate. But even if you can't contribute financially, just sharing, retweeting, reposting our messaging, you'd be surprised at how well it works to get the word out.
No, thank you so much for that. Visit that website. We're sharing the banner so that you can distinguish this prosperity project from some of the others that are out there. Hope that you have found this convo cathartic, educational, because that's what we aim to do here on the Black Fundraisers Podcast. So, good people, Until next time, you know what to do. Stay tuned, stay down,